Please turn in your Bibles to the book of Daniel chapter 10. Daniel chapter 10, and place a marker in Ephesians chapter 6. Today I'm going to be reading from the New International Version, and the title of today's message is Get in the Ring. Does anyone here watch professional wrestling? I didn't figure there'd be a whole lot of people. I have a brother-in-law, and I don't know if he still is, but back in the day, he was really big into professional wrestling. Not doing it himself, but watching it on television. And we would hang out with my sister and my brother-in-law, so I was exposed to this world of watching professional wrestling on television. And one thing that I learned relatively quickly is kind of a staple in the world of watching professional wrestling is for two wrestlers who were not on the schedule to fight that night to get into some kind of an argument. You know, they'll get into an argument about what one guy said about another guy, or maybe what that guy said about the other guy's girlfriend, and they'll be fighting, they'll be yelling at one another, and then before you know it, one of the guys who's almost always standing in the wrestling ring says, "Listen here, brother!" You know how they do? They like brother has 72 R's at the end of it. "Listen here, brother!" And then they'll say, "I think we should settle this right now. How about you get in the ring?" And the crowd goes wild, and the announcers act like they're shocked, like this is the most amazing thing they've ever seen. How could this be happening? Can you believe it? We're going to see it right here and right now on Monday Night Raw, or what? I don't know what it's called. And everybody that's watching gets to see this match that they've been hoping for and waiting for and talking about in online blogs. Those four little words, "get in the ring," carry so much weight. Those words mean put up or shut up. Stop running your mouth and do something. They mean it's go time. Those four little words mean that it's time to fight. Well, today I want to talk to you about being in a fight. I want to start by asking you a question. I want you to raise your hand if you've ever been in a real, actual fight. And I don't mean like you're messing around with your buddies. I mean you were truly trying to hurt the other person badly. If you've ever been in a fight, raise your hand. Put it up high. Now listen, the reason I'm asking this is I really just want to make a list of all the people who I need to make sure I don't make mad. Like, who's mad enough to punch me? One of these days, y'all will have to ask Christina about a fight that she had on the playground at Eastside Elementary. I'm not going to say it, but it's a funny one. If I remember correctly, I've only ever actually been in 3 real fights in my life. Like real, where I was trying to hurt the other person, they were trying to hurt me. All of them were before the age of 16. I mean, I don't go around fighting people today. I've learned that it's not very pleasant. But one of those fights in particular, I remember. I remember it well. It was actually between me and one of my cousins. We were both, I don't know, probably 14, something like that. And it started by each of us trying to show the other one we were tougher than the other one. But really quickly, you know, it turned into we pretty much wanted to kill one another. We weren't playing around. And the reason I tell you about that fight, there's 2 reasons. The first reason is this, because I won. And we need to go on record right now. I want everybody to understand I won that fight. But the second reason, and the more important reason I tell you about that fight, is because it went on for what seemed like a really, really long time. I mean, we were out in the parking lot of the apartment complex, and we were going at it, and it went on for a good 20 minutes before one of our parents happened to look out the window and see that we were killing one another. And then they opened it, and they yelled at us, and they brought us inside, and they yelled at us for fighting, and he got his wounds nursed, and but today I want to show you a story from the Bible about a fight that was a lot worse than that fight. It didn't go on for 20 minutes. The fight I'm going to tell you about went on for 21 days. You say, man, that's a long fight. Yes, it is. And it involved a couple of dudes who were a lot bigger and badder than two punk teenagers in a parking lot of an apartment complex. You might have already guessed that the story, this fight I'm talking about, is found in the book of Daniel, chapter 10. Now, we're going to start reading in verse number 12, but before we do, I want to tell you what happens in verses 1 through 11. In Daniel, chapter 10, verse 1, it tells us that Daniel is in the country of Persia. And so Daniel's in Persia, and he receives a revelation about a war. And the Bible even tells us that the revelation that he received was true. Well, this revelation, it really rocked Daniel's world. It really made him scared. It frightened him. It shook him up. So it says that as soon as he received that revelation, he mourned or grieved for 3 weeks, for 21 days. He was heartbroken. And it also tells us that for those same 3 weeks, he fasted. It says that he didn't eat any choice food or any meat, that no wine touched his lips, and he didn't even use any lotion on his skin. For 3 weeks, Daniel fasted and mourned. Some of you might have heard of a Daniel fast. There have been books written about Daniel fast and how you do it, and it's a 21-day thing. And honestly, I want to challenge you guys and ask you to go on a journey with me. I realize this is the Sunday before Thanksgiving, so we're not going to start this journey tomorrow. But, yeah, yes, Lord, they say. Yes, Lord. But on January 1st, I'm going to ask you to start a 21-day fast with me. I want us to fast the first 21 days of 2021. And I'm not going to tell you how to fast or what to fast. I'm going to leave that between you and the Lord. I don't know what He's going to ask you to do. He may ask you to fast desserts. For some of you, that'd be a big deal. For others of us, I don't care that much about dessert. He may ask you to fast dinner for 21 days or breakfast. Or He may ask you to give up soda or caffeine or sweets. I don't know what the Lord's going to. He may even ask you to give up something that's not even food. He may ask you to give up lotion or television or social media. But I'm going to ask that every one of you, if you would please, start praying about it and asking God what He wants you to do. The first 21 days of the year, I really want us to fast together. And I think it's really cool, especially this year. I really would like us to start every year this way. But this year in particular, because I don't know if you realize this or not, but on the 20th day of the year, a pretty big event is going to happen. On the 20th day of the year, either our current president or Joe Biden are going to be inaugurated as president. So do me that favor and start praying and asking the Lord what He wants you to do for those 3 weeks starting on January 1st. But Daniel is mourning and fasting for 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden, he's standing on the banks of the Tigris River, and he looks out over the water, and in front of him, floating above the water, is an angel. Daniel describes what the angel looks like, and it's actually pretty cool. I'm not going to tell you today for the sake of time, but you can go look it up when you want. But he looks out and he sees this angel, and the angel starts to talk to Daniel. And then in verse 12, we get to the important part for our message today. We're going to read verses 12 through 14 of Daniel 10 together, and here's what it says. Then he being the angel, then he continued, "Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come." So let's recap here. Daniel receives a revelation, and it's a revelation that really shakes him up, or really scares him. It's about a war, and it's about the future of his people, we just learned. And he mourns and fasts for 21 days, and then an angel shows up, and he says, I've come in response to your prayers. I'm going to explain to you what the revelation that you received is about. Now, today I want to share with you, church, 4 things that Daniel did when he got scared. 4 things that Daniel did when this unforeseen situation presented itself to him, and he was scared and didn't know what to do. And these are 4 of the same things that we should do when we face adversity in our lives. The first thing is this. He thought about the situation. First, Daniel thought about things. The angel's talking to Daniel, and he says, since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding. Set your mind to gain understanding. In other words, you thought about things. Church, I got to tell you, some of you are running around scared right now in life. And you really just need to stop and think about things. You need to stop and set your mind to gain understanding. I remember when I was a kid one time, I was at Bell's Amusement Park, and I went in a mirror maze. Have you ever been in a mirror maze? Man, they're jacked up. You have these little areas, probably, 2.5 feet maybe wide, 2.5 feet long squares, and there are mirrors or pieces of glass all through it, and you have to find your way through this maze. And if somebody were to stop and think about it, then they'd probably be able to figure it out pretty easily. But for me, when I went in this thing as probably a 9 or 10-year-old kid, I don't remember how old I was, but I went in there and I got 20 or 30 feet in, and I got scared to death. I was frightened so badly. I didn't know. I don't know what I thought was going to happen. I don't know if I thought monsters were going to come out of the mirror and get me, but I couldn't get out, and I panicked, and I froze, and I screamed at the top of my lungs until the kid that was working that attraction went through the maze and got me and used some trap doors and took me straight out of that thing. If I had just been able to stop and think about things, I wouldn't have been so scared, and I wouldn't have been so panicked, and I wouldn't have frozen. But I wasn't able to do that. And some of you are facing a situation like that in your life today. You're scared, and you're frozen. You just don't know what to do. And what you need to do is you need to put your mind to gaining understanding. Now, if you're like me, this isn't a problem for you. It was on that day for me, but anymore, I'm a thinker. It's what I do. Every situation, I analyze it and overanalyze it to a fault. I'm telling you, it's what I do. We are looking at some Christmas gifts for our kids right now, and Christina and I have been to 13 different stores and 27 websites, and she's like, I cannot shop with you, man, because I think everything through. I'm a very logical thinker. It's what I do. When I have a problem, I immediately set my mind to trying to gain understanding. I immediately think about the situation and analyze it and try to find a solution. But some of you are feelers. You know who you are. Now listen, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Christina's a feeler. I mean, she's the feelingest feeler there is. And I don't think that that's a weakness. That doesn't mean that Christina's not intelligent, because she is very intelligent. And it doesn't mean she's not wise, because she's very wise, a lot wiser than me sometimes. All it means is that her first instinct is to feel, and my first instinct is to think. That's why we work great together. We balance one another out. Because sometimes I'll get a text message from someone, and all they really need is for their son or their brother or their pastor, whatever, or their father, whatever role I serve in their life. All they really need is for someone to feel with them for a second. And I go to trying to think about it and find a solution and tell them what they should do. And Christina will step in and say, hey, dummy, I realize you're not the compassion connection, but you may want to stop and just feel for a second. And sometimes it works the other way. Sometimes I have to step in and remind Christina, why don't you just stop feeling for a minute and just think? Just try to figure something out. We balance one another out. But some of you today are here, whether it's in person or online, and you're a feeler, and you know you're a feeler, and you don't have a thinker to balance you out. That can be a dangerous situation. If that's you, then I'm here to tell you today, when you face adversity, the first thing you should try to do is set your mind to gain understanding. Whenever you face a situation in your life, don't immediately turn into a puddle of tears or a ball of rage. Just stop and think. The first thing Daniel did when he got scared was he thought about things. The second thing he did was he turned to God. Daniel figured out pretty quick that he wasn't going to be able to think his way to an answer. So he turned to God. Specifically, he fasted and he prayed. The angel said, since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding, you thought about things, and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard. Daniel humbled himself before God. He admitted that he wasn't going to be able to do this on his own. He had to have God's help. And then he fasted, as we already talked about, and he prayed. You say, well, how do you know he prayed? Because it says, your words were heard. It didn't say from the moment you set your mind to understanding and humbled yourself before God, the Lord saw you and helped you. There are some scriptures that say that. The Lord saw his people. He saw how they were hurting. But there are others where it says, and he heard their cries. Here it says that Daniel's words were heard. Daniel prayed. Church, I want to stop today and I want to remind you that prayer is vital in your life. Prayer is the single most important thing that you can do in your life, in every situation, in every circumstance. Most of us, myself included, need to get back to being people of prayer, to turning things over to God. Because sometimes we try to think so much that we don't turn to God. We don't humble ourselves before him. We don't fast and we don't pray. Church, Daniel was a person of prayer. You got to remember, this is the same guy who a few chapters back was thrown into a pit full of lions. He was thrown into a pit full of lions because they made a law that he wasn't allowed to pray. And he said, I ain't following that law. And he went upstairs. He opened his windows. It said, just as he had always done, he prayed. Daniel was a person of prayer. If there's anything at all that we need to emulate in Daniel's life, that thing is prayer. Listen, I told you a few minutes ago about Daniel fasting, and I challenged you to fast with me for 21 days to start off 2021. And I still want you to do that. But listen, if I have to choose for you whether you're going to fast or whether you're going to pray, I will take prayer every single time. But I shouldn't have to choose. Because, church, we should be people of fasting and of prayer. Reminds me, I was at the dentist a while back. I was getting my teeth cleaned, and the girl that was cleaning my teeth, you know how they are. They talk to you when they got their hands in your mouth, and she's talking to me, and she says, well, how often do you brush, and how often do you floss, and are you using mouthwash, and all these questions she's asking me, and I told her, and you know how they guilt you about everything, but I was honest with her. She's a sweet girl, and she's been cleaning my teeth for a long time, and I said, look, I'll be honest. Every single morning I brush and I floss. I said, but some evenings I just get lazy. I said, and I'll just do one or the other. I won't do both. And I said, actually, that reminds me. I said, if I'm only going to do one at night, which one would you rather me do, brush or floss? And she said, well, I guess I'd rather you brush. And then she said, no, wait a minute. She said, what are you getting me to say here? She said, listen, do both. Do both. That's what I'm telling you today, church. If I have to choose between prayer and fasting, I'm going to tell you, you need to be praying, but you need to do both. Prayer is important. Without prayer, Daniel never would have gotten the answer that he needed. The angel said, your words were heard. Someone look across the aisle at the other side there and tell them prayer is important. You got to say it louder than that. You're wearing a mask. Tell them prayer is important. If you don't believe me, I'm going to give you some scriptures. 1 John 5:14 and 15 says this. This is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything, which by the way, that's through prayer, if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have when we ask him. Philippians 4:6 says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. James 5:13 says, is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Jesus said in Mark 11:24, therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. Romans 12:12 says, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. And Colossians 4:2 says, devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful. Church, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of other passages, other scriptures in both Old and New Testament books that remind us that prayer is vital in our life. Prayer is important. We are living in unprecedented times, truly unprecedented. We're living in the middle of a pandemic that has turned life upside down. Cases are rising literally by the day. I remember when just even 2 months ago, 1 month ago, when everyone was making such a big deal about COVID, about how bad it was. And I told Christina, I said, I know that it's real. I said, but I'm just shocked if there's this many cases, why do I not know a single person who's gotten it? Church, right now I know a dozen. It's taking over. We have a presidential election that is yet to be called and that is surrounded with a litany of concerning accusations. People are losing their jobs and their businesses at the highest level in a very long time right now. Suicides are way up, as are mental health issues. This is a scary, scary world that we're living in. And maybe that's even true in your life. See, church, some of you are battling depression. Some of you are battling illness right now. Some of you have been struggling in your marriage. Some of you may have lost your job or you're scared that you're going to. Some of you have finances that are in a total mess and you're so scared. Some of you are hurting. Now more than ever, you need to be praying. Now more than ever, we as a church need to be praying. We need to be on our face before God, crying out, asking for help. But Pastor, some of you say, I tried praying and it didn't help. I told you about the conversation I had just the other day with the man that said just that. I tried praying. I don't know why he's not doing it. My faith is as strong as it's ever been. My relationship with God is as strong as it's ever been, but I'm still sick. I don't know why he's not doing it. I tried praying, and it didn't help. Church, if that's you, if that's the way you feel today, you need to write this third point down in all caps. In fact, you need to write it down, and then as soon as you leave here, you need to run as fast as you can to the closest tattoo parlor and have them put it on your arm so you see it every day. I'm kidding. Don't go get a tattoo. But hang it on your mirror. Put it on your bathroom mirror. Put it above, in front of your speedometer on your car. Just put it right there in the dash. You say, well, I'll get pulled over. Fine, get pulled over, and then read this third point. See, the first thing that Daniel did was he thought about the situation. The second thing he did was he fasted and he prayed. And the third thing was Daniel did not give up. Church, don't give up. The angel told Daniel, from the very first day you began praying, from the very first word you said, God sent me with an answer. But then in verse 13, we get to see the fight. He says, from the very first day, your words were heard, but the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Church, there's something vitally important that you need to know. You need to realize this if you didn't already. We are not alone in this world. There are spiritual forces at work all around us. The spiritual realm is very, very real. And I'm not talking about Casper, and I'm not talking about Ghostbusters. I'm talking about angels and demons are at war this very moment all around us. They're in a fight. The angel that appeared to Daniel said on the very first day Daniel started praying, God sent him. You got to realize this. Daniel, he gets this revelation and he gets scared. And he says, God, help. And God says, go give him an answer. From the very first day. But the answer didn't come. Because it says that he was detained by the prince of the Persian kingdom. Now, that's not referring to a human prince. A human prince didn't keep the angel from coming. The word prince there is being used to refer to a spiritual being. And it's actually the spiritual being, the demon, that was over the province of Persia. This demon detained him, kept him away for 21 days. This angel was in a fight for 21 days trying to get to Daniel with an answer from the Lord. And then finally it says Michael, one of the named archangels of the Bible, probably the strongest of all the angels, the biggest, baddest angel in heaven, showed up. It says, I was detained for 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, in other words, one of the bosses, one of the guys in charge, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. He said, I wasn't strong enough, but Michael came and he kicked that dude's butt. Michael came and he allowed me to be able to get to you. Now listen, I know that you might wonder, how in the world could there be angels that are on assignment from God himself that are not able to do their job? How is it possible that there are angels with instructions from God who are not strong enough to be able to do what God has told them to do? The reason this is the case, and it might scare you, this might rock your world, you may not have realized this before today. The reason is that angels are not in charge of this world that we live in. The devil is. You say, now, wait a minute, Pastor, that's blasphemy. No, it's not blasphemy. Listen, I'll show you in the Bible. In John 12:31 and again in John 14:30, Jesus himself refers to the devil as the prince of this world. The prince, the guy in charge of this world. And then Paul in 2 Corinthians 4:4 writes this, the God of this age, God with a little g, not big G, the God of this age, or the devil, has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel. You see, church, God has temporarily allowed control of this world to be in hands of the enemy. He has temporarily allowed Satan to be in charge of this world. Now, that doesn't mean that Satan's all-powerful. It doesn't mean that he's omnipresent. It doesn't mean that he's like God. He's not at all. There's just one of them. And the Bible tells us that he spends his time going all around, going to and fro, seeking whomever he can devour. He goes all around the world trying to find people who he can devour. So it doesn't mean that he's like God, but it does mean that he kind of runs things down here. And that's the bad news, and it's kind of scary, but that is the reason why cancer and COVID and sexual immorality and abortion and all of the other evils in this world, that's the reason that they are so rampant. Because Christians aren't in charge. And Christ isn't even in charge of this world. The devil is. That's the bad news. But there is some good news. You see, the angel couldn't get to Daniel for 21 days because he was held up by the prince of Persia. But if you skip down to verses 20 and 21 of Daniel chapter 10, the angel says to Daniel, he says, do you know why I've come to you? He says, do you understand why I'm here? I'm here to give you an answer. Do you know why I'm here? I'm here to give you an answer. And then he says this, soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first, I'll tell you what's written in the book of truth. And then he says this, no one supports me against them except Michael, your prince. He says, I'm here to give you this important message from God. I'm here to give you the answer you've been praying for. I'm here to give you what you need. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to fight with the prince of Persia again. He says, and when I do, the prince of Greece, he's going to come and help him. They're going to gang up on me. Church, I'm not making this stuff up. It's right there in your Bible. He says, I'm going to go back and fight this dude again, and when I do, the prince of Greece is going to come help him. And then he says, no one supports me against them except Michael. I don't have any help against these demons except Michael. And then he says two words that I love. He says, except Michael, your prince. Remember, he's talking about princes, he's talking about angels. He says, no one helps me against these guys except Michael, your angel, your prince. Church, I don't know about you, but if I'm living in a world that is controlled by the enemy, and I'm living in a world where the enemy I know is going to and fro all across the face of the earth, seeking people who he can devour. If I'm living in a world where, like Jesus said, the enemy is crouched at the door waiting to snatch me away, the guy that I want on my side, the guy that I want fighting for me, the guy that I want in my corner is the biggest, baddest dude in the room. I've been on mission trips with Jesse. Jesse's backstage right now, so you can't see him, and he needs to stay back there. But he's a big man. I've been in some situations before where I knew it was going to be a little bit hairy, and I said, Jesse, why don't you come with me? If I'm going to be in a fight, I want the biggest dude on my team. Now, maybe you're like, now listen, Pastor, he said that Michael was Daniel's prince. He didn't say he was your prince. Well, listen to this. This is so cool. Chapters 11 and 12 are the answer that Daniel's been waiting for. Chapters 11 and 12 of Daniel are the message from God. They're the explanation of this vision, this revelation that he's received. And in the beginning, in verse number 1 of chapter 12, if you were to look at that, here's what it says. It's talking about the end times. And it says, at that time, at the end times, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, say your people. The great prince who protects your people will arise. It says there will be a time of distress such that has not happened from the beginning of the nations until then. He's talking about the great tribulation. He says, but at that time, your people, say your people. And then he defines what he's talking about when he says, your people. At that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. The book he's talking about there is a book that's called the Lamb's Book of Life. It's a book wherein the name of every person who has accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior is written. Last week, I told you we had someone in our service that gave their life to Christ. In that very moment, their name was written down in the book. And now, because their name is in that book, Michael, the chief prince, The archangel is fighting to protect them. And he's fighting to protect you and me because we are your people. But we play a part in this fight. Church, can you imagine if Daniel, when he received this revelation that scared him so badly, if he had just ignored it and not tried to understand it? Or can you imagine if when he had realized that in his own human brain he wasn't going to be able to decipher this problem, can you imagine if instead of praying and fasting, if he had just given up and moved on? If he had ignored the situation? Or what if on the 20th day, Daniel said, I'm not getting an answer. It's not worth it. I give up. We don't know what would have happened. Maybe the angel still would have made it. But can you imagine if on the 20th day, a day before the answer got there, if Daniel had given up? Church, there's a battle going on, and you have a part to play in it. Ephesians 6 tells us what our part is. Ephesians 6 is Paul's parting words to the church of Ephesus. He tells them how parents and children should interact, and slaves and owners and all these different things. And then in verse number 10, there's a passage that starts talking about our part in spiritual warfare, our part in this battle. Starting in verse 10, it says, finally, in other words, the last thing I'm going to tell you, finally be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Verse number 12 says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. He said, we don't fight against Democrats or Republicans or even libertarians. Our fight isn't with the media. Our fight isn't with doctors and nurses and contact tracers. I read an article the other day that talked about the contact tracers and how people will cuss them out and hang up on them. Our fight is not against those people. Our fight is not against our boss or our neighbor or our spouse or our children or our parents. Our fight is against the rulers, authorities, and powers of this dark world. Our fight is against spiritual wickedness in high places. He goes on to tell us to put on the whole armor of God. We don't have time to talk about the armor of God today, but I encourage you to go read this. But at the very end of this passage, I saw something this week that I've never noticed before, I don't think. Paul lists out all the pieces of armor. You know, he talks about the breastplate of righteousness and the shield of faith and the belt of truth and the shoes of the gospel. He talks about all the different pieces of armor that we need to put on. And then in verse 18, here's what he says. He says, put on the armor and pray. Pray. He says, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. And then he says, with this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. He says, with this in mind, knowing that you're in a battle, knowing that we don't fight against flesh and blood, that we don't fight against the people here on earth who oppose us, but that our fight is with spiritual beings. Knowing that, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Church, I want to challenge you today to get in the ring. It's time to fight. It's time to do your part. Maybe you're sitting there today. Maybe you're at home and you're watching online. And you said, you know what, Pastor, my life's pretty good right now. I don't really have any problems. I guess I don't need to pray. Yes, you do. Because Paul says, always be alert, be watching for what's coming, and always pray for all of God's people. If you don't have anything to pray about, pray for someone else. Go down the list. I got to tell you something. I heard a pastor the other day. He was preaching a message, and he said, does anybody else feel like that the enemy is attacking more than usual right now? And it feels that way, doesn't it? But then he turned it around, and he said, I think we're giving the devil way too much credit. The devil's not fighting any harder right now than he was a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years. He's doing the same thing he's always been doing. But maybe his attacks are just landing more often. And the thing that opens the door for that to happen is when we stop being people of prayer. Church, it's time to fight. I can't tell you how heavy the burden that I have right now is for us to be a praying church. And part of it's my fault. You know, we've got this pandemic. So we don't do what we used to do. We don't open up the altars, and we don't have people come forward, and we don't lay hands on. And I don't know what the right answer is. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what to do. I don't want to make anyone sick, but I miss being in the altars on our faces before God. Church, we need to fight. We're in a battle, and time is running out. I'm going to ask everyone in the room to join me in doing something. And I don't want you to bow your head and close your eyes. I want you to find a place right now, whether it's where you're at there, you can turn around and kneel down in your seat. You can sit where you're at. You can stand up. But let's just take a few minutes and let's get started in the fight. Let's start praying. You say, I don't know what to say. Well, just say something. Pray for me. Some of you, you're already there. You're like, Lord, help him. Help that boy. Guys, let's pray. Let's spend a few minutes in prayer, and let's ask God to change our hearts and to call us back to Him and to help us become people of prayer.
Miracle work, promise keep, light in the
You know, if I were to put out a survey and everyone were to be honest, and I said, how much time do you spend in prayer every day? You'd be surprised, church, to hear how many people just don't pray. I mean, if you're generous and you give them a minute for their prayers over their meals, then maybe it's 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. And I know when you start praying, sometimes really you don't know what to say. I'm going to challenge you this week. Spend at least 5 minutes a day in prayer for our church. Would you do that for me? Raise your hand if you will do that for me. 5 minutes a day for our church.